Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette. We're so glad you're with us to stay curious today. Look at these beautiful stamps I have behind me that are celebrating two events 6 years apart in history that really changed the world. And of course, they're the Apollo 11 moon landing and the Apollo Soyuz Test Project, where Russia and America shook hands in space after being outright rivals and adversaries 6 years before, when Russia wanted to beat us to the moon and we beat them. All right. So we're going to talk about the juxtaposition in history of Apollo 11 and the Apollo Soyuz Test Project is they landed on the same day, July 24th, 1969 for Apollo 11 and 1975, of course, for the Apollo Soyuz Test Project. So we're going to talk about both of these landings. Where are the command modules for Apollo 11 and the Apollo Soyuz Test Project? The last command module ever. Think about that. And we're also going to focus a little bit on the Mercury astronaut who finally flew the Apollo Soyuz Test Project. Of course, that's Deke Slayton, who was really probably enjoyed his role of being the chief of the astronaut office and making all those heavy decisions for years about the crews and who was going to be the first people on the moon and all that sort of stuff. So, well, as I gather my notes up here, I want to say hi to Selvin Trotter. He's behind our Stay Curious Streamlabs program today. Marty taking the day off to spend some time with family. So we appreciate Selvin, you helping us out today. We're off to a good flying start. And let's just kick it off with a little bit of space news today where, yeah, you all know that that's the golden record. Two of those are going through, they're out of the solar system, in fact, attached to the sides of Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 that in the 1970s were launched with Carl Sagan, the popularizer of astronomy in the 1970s, without a doubt. He and his wife Ann Durian created the words and images that were to be used on this gold record. Yep, they included a needle with it so that aliens could figure out how to play it. The instructions are all on the one side on the left there. But why is that important, Mark? Because Sotheby's is having an auction Thursday, and you can own the original tapes of Carl Sagan putting this all together. Selvin, the minimum bid's $300,000. So maybe we go together and buy it, huh? Okay. So that's something to look forward to Thursday. We'll let you know Friday what that thing sold for, as Sotheby's is having a big auction on the original tape of this, the famous golden record. So let me have a sip of coffee there to get me pumped up. And let's get that Apollo 11 splashdown there. It was very, let me go this way. No wonder. There's the Apollo 11 splashdown. And it was about in the afternoon. Get your notes, Mark, here. It was 5:50 local time in the South Pacific, 235 miles south of the Johnston Atoll. Aircraft carrier USS Hornet got them. But of course, the astronauts were going to be quarantined in case of any moon germs. Now, there is the command module Eagle bobbing in the ocean. Those bags, if you don't know, the three inflatable bags at the top, flipped it over. They expected it to invert, and the astronauts were actually upside down, clanging with their, of course, safety harnesses to their seats. You see the Kapton foil, the gold foil there that's been burned off by reentry. Some of the frogmen grabbed that. Some of the smart frogmen grabbed that. Some of the stickers on there and so forth to be sold decades later. There's our three astronauts in their biohazard garbs. And I remember Selvin thinking back in 1969, that's stupid. There's going to be no moon germs that can go all the way around the world, okay? And then can you say COVID-19 pandemic, all right? Yes, germs can travel all the way around the world, and that was quite horrible, and one day we'll learn the whole story, but we do know that thousands of people died because of it. in America alone. So anyway, had to protect ourselves from moon germs. There's a cool picture one of the frogmen took of one of the astronauts waving. And there you see the basket coming down that was going to pick them up onto the helicopter and then take them over to the Hornet, where President Nixon was waiting to see them. And Hornet +3, if you got that button anywhere, that's worth about $50. So we celebrate Apollo 11 command module is in the Smithsonian, shown here. There are approximately 3,500 historic Apollo moon items among the 17,000 at the National Air and Space Museum. Not the Udvar Hazy where Discovery is. That's almost all space stuff. But the main one downtown on the mall in Washington. 17,000, 3,500 is 17,000. That's about a fifth of all of the, about a fifth of all Smithsonian artifacts or space artifacts. 400 objects related specifically to Apollo 11. And there's the command module. And then they have got to take you a peek inside. They've restored everything. There you see the couches at the bottom. You're looking as if you're at the hatch looking down on the thing. So yes, the command module Columbia is, of course, in the Smithsonian. And I think it was like 5 years ago, as they were doing another restoration, somebody said, wait a minute, Mike Collins, the command module pilot, wrote this on the spacecraft. Spacecraft 107, alias Apollo 11, alias Columbia, the best ship to come down the line. God bless her. Michael Collins, CMP. And he was the director of the Smithsonian when it was first, that's the job he took after being an astronaut on Apollo 11. He tried to do some liaison work for the State Department, and that didn't work out. And he became the first director of the Smithsonian while it was being built. So he probably snuck in there and did that. Or maybe he did that during the orbit. He passed away about a year ago at age 90. And I forget if somebody asked him how that came about. So I love that little bit of trivia in there. Now, our beautiful backdrop here includes Chris Calley, his father Paul Calley's famous Apollo 11 stamp. Chris did the 25th anniversary stamp. And then these were cool Apollo stamps that came out a couple years ago. Now at the bottom, is the Soyuz, Apollo Soyuz stamps that were issued. And the one on the right is from Robert McCall, after link-up image, and a Russian artist, Anatoly Aximet, designed the before link-up image there. So the pair postage issue, they printed 161 million of both these stamps combined in America and Russia to celebrate this great coup d'etat. The détente was the word that President Nixon used when he proposed this mission after Apollo 11. And during the Skylab era, they knew they were going to have one more command module left. So it was up to America to put the together. There's Chris's Apollo 11 stamp there. And another beautiful stamp. There's the Apollo Soyuz stamp of Robert McCall in the center. And here is the mock-up. Left, the command module and service module was an artifact that was used in training. And the Soyuz was also a training module. And the docking hatch was again one used in training. And that's at the Smithsonian. America was involved with the docking hatch. We had to build it. And that's where they met and made the famous handshakes. You can see all those pictures online as we're kind of featuring a little bit different slant on it today as we're looking at the crew. Alexei Leonov. Kubasov was the other Russian cosmonaut. They have both passed away. Of course, the general, Tom Stafford there in the center and Vance Brand in the middle, are both 92 years old, all right? And the general and Leonov stayed friends for a long, long time. I didn't have enough time today putting a program together because I helped tour some Japanese students today in the building. But Tom Stafford's Air and Space Museum in his hometown of Oklahoma, Weatherford, Oklahoma, just west of Oklahoma City, has all kinds of Russian stuff, including about 10 vodka bottles signed by the crew and all that stuff in there. A lot of cool Russian stuff there at Tom Stafford's fabulous Air and Space Museum, his hometown of Weatherford. I've been there 4 times, folks. You need to put that museum on your bucket list. When they were in space, they did a lot of things. The Russians brought half of something. We brought the other half. This was just one of the major emblems that they put together. Of course, the Apollo Soyuz test flight was the final flight of an Apollo spacecraft. And its landing, I didn't put a landing picture in there, I guess. But we'll talk about that in a second when we look at the spacecraft. So President Nixon was really proud to have proposed this, but he's not the one that saw it through. He left office disgraced, as President Gerald Ford, shown in the Oval Office, is the one who got to talk to the Russians and Americans live, as you see on the TV there. Look at that presidential TV in 1975. My God, if you brought that into the house, your wife would say, take that to the garage right now. All right, we're not going to have that in the house. Let alone the phone, Selvin. Yeah, that, by the way, anyone under 30, that is a telephone that President Gerald Ford's talking to the ASTP crew on there. So a lot of fun come out of this. I mean, think about it, folks. In 1969, Apollo 11 landed. 6 years later, we just shook hands with the Russians in space. And all kinds of fun stuff with our Snoopy and their mascot bear on decals. And, of course, Snoopy being the mascot of safety, thanks to Apollo 10 vehicles being named Charlie Brown and Snoopy by Commander, by the way, Tom Stafford of Apollo 10. So, but I just find it amazing in a quick, short years, we turned our rivals and adversaries that wanted to prove that communism was the way for the world to embrace and not democracy. And we kicked their pants. We not only went to the moon in July 1969, we doubled down on President Kennedy's pledge and did it again in November 1969. And here we are shaking hands, but it was not without serious consequences for the Americans. As we look at the home of the Apollo Soyuz Test Project is at the Los Angeles Museum there. And our good friend Doug Forrest, I'll bet he's watching today. Doug has probably been in there and seen this for himself. But when it landed, there was a serious problem during splashdown, which the crew were accidentally exposed to toxic monomethylhydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide fumes. And this was caused by the unignited hypergolic propellants venting from the spacecraft out of the reaction control thrusters. Those little holes on the side there were venting, supposed to vent purge all those hypergolic fuels before they hit the water. Well, the RCS, reaction control system, was inadvertently left on during descent. The toxic fumes were sucked into the spacecraft, and Vance Brand passed out, lost consciousness. Stafford, I've heard Tom Stafford talk about this personally at talks where he had to, they were upside down because it had flipped over. The cone end was in the water, the reentry end was sticking up, and they were like trapped in their seats. And Vance Brand passed out, and down at the bottom there was, the general said, was the masks that they had to put on. He had to unstrap himself, literally fall down there, grab them with this toxic fume coming in there, put a face mask on Vance Brand, and then also Slayton took one. And when they opened up the hatch, they were, weak, and it was a moment. All right. In fact, such a moment that they were taken to Honolulu and hospitalized for 2 weeks. All right. 14 days they had to recover from this toxic hypergolic fume vents that had gotten into their lungs. So, in August, we're going to have a good friend of the museum, John Tribe, who is a Rockwell engineer, expert in hypergolic fuels on the Apollo command module. John Tribe, can't wait for you to explain a little bit about what happened to those astronauts in there. I've heard the General Staffer talk about it a couple of times. I've heard him in talks. So that's the Apollo Soyuz Test Project there. And just want to mention one thing about it is Vance Brand and Deke Slayton were the 77th and 78th persons to go to space, all right, in July 1975. 77 and 78 human being numbers, all right, not missions. A couple astronauts, like this was the 4th trip to space for the General Tom Stafford, all right. But Brand and Slayton were rookies, number 78 and 77 to go to space. We say 602 people have orbited Earth since 1961, Yuri Gagarin. So in 1975, that only represents 13% of the humans who've gone to space in 60 years, all right? Put it another way, 85% of the humans going to space were yet to go to fulfill the 602 that we've had in space in 2023. My point is, a small number was still going to space. Space still had a lot of unknowns. Though we'd walked on the moon, we'd been on a space station for 84 days duration, and now shook hands with the Russians in space, we still had a lot to learn about space. And thank God we've not lost any people in space since 2003 with the Columbia accident, and of course the launch of Challenger, but those were launch and reentry problems, and nobody actually has died in space except the 3 cosmonauts on their reentry. So but I just want to emphasize 13% of the humans that have gone to space now had gone to space in 1975. Kind of a low number in my mind. Well, let's look at this Apollo Soyuz Test Project in a way that the American Space Museums loves looking at things, and that's going out to our beautiful Spaceview Park. We do have a monument out there to the Apollo Soyuz Test Project, and it was dedicated in about the I had that in front of me here, dedicated in I think about 2005, somewhere in there. We've got the handprints of Alexei Leonov. I bet there's not many places in the world that have his handprints. He was also the first human to walk in space, all right. On his Vostok mission, he went outside and had a hard time getting back inside. But there's his handprints, and then there's Kubasov's handprints. Again, we consider our Spaceview Park with our Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo and shuttle monuments a kind of a Taj Mahal, the only place in the world you can do your handprints there. So I'm going to try to read this off the screen there because I think it's important. America leaders having achieved the goal of first man landing on the moon, and Soviet leaders having begun the space race with the first satellite and the first men in space, realized that space cooperation could not be beneficial to both nations' programs. The Apollo Soyuz Test Project flew after the Moon and Skylab program and was the last flight to use a Saturn V rocket, Saturn rocket S-1B, and Apollo spacecraft. The mission used a spacecraft common docking system that could be used by both nations for future space rescues or space station visits. On July 17, 1975, astronauts Stafford, Brandon Slayton in an Apollo spacecraft docked with the cosmonauts Kubasov and Leonov in a Soyuz spacecraft. The ASTP demonstrated a common docking design and international space cooperation. It also served as a tool in the thawing of the Cold War. The U.S. Space Walk of Fame Foundation is honored to recognize the first international space flight by including the handprints of cosmonauts Kubasov and Leonov in the Apollo program astronaut collection. And thank you, Mr. Charlie Mars, our godfather for many years of this beautiful museum, for harvesting these handprints. And I know Charlie had a hand in those beautiful words there. Well, there is the General, Tom Stafford. He's also over at the Gemini monuments. You can see his handprints over there, and you have a likeness of him there. And the people's names you see on those plaques gave the museum $100 to honor them as space workers during the Apollo program. The Gemini, they etched them into marble on the four-sided sign 2 for Gemini up there, and they're on bricks at the Mercury Monument. So, there is General Tom Stafford. God bless you, sir. What an American. You know, after he was done with his 4 flights, 2 Gemini, 2 Apollo, he then became the commander of Edwards Air Force Base, and thus always a general. 92 years old. And there's Vance Brand. Vance Brand's been a great friend of the museum, just like Mr. Stafford. Have donated things for our auctions, have gone to fundraisers and so forth. There's Vance a few years ago. He actually bopped into our museum after paying his $8 senior citizen entry fee, and nobody knew who he was, and left a note to Karan, Conklin, our executive director, to pass on to Charlie Mars, our godfather, that everything looked great at the museum. And I remember Karan saying when she got that note, she's running out of her office saying, "Where's Vance? Where's Vance?" And he'd already gotten in his car and left. So, but really a humble guy and a great guy. And he's also 92 years old. But we thought we'd opportunity to feature Deke Slayton, his only flight. Of course, Deke Slayton was an Apollo or a Mercury astronaut, not an Apollo astronaut. He was a Mercury astronaut that ended up with a heart murmur that grounded him. He was going to actually fly the mission after John Glenn that Scott Carpenter replaced him at. Little facts about Deke. He was born in Sparta, Wisconsin on March 1st, 1929. He would be 100 years old next year. Unfortunately, he died very young at age 69 in 1993 of a brain tumor. So he's been gone for 30 years, of course. He worked on a farm in Wisconsin, raising sheep and cows, and grew tobacco, all right? And he grew up without electricity or indoor plumbing. And when the heart murmur was discovered and he was grounded, believe it or not, flight doctors recommended a cardiac catheterization to determine if he'd had congenital condition. But NASA management rejected the cardiac catheterization because of the risks of the operation. I know myself has had a heart cath and had stents put in, and boy, they do it almost, it's just normal procedure 60 years later. If he could have had that done to him and had a few stents put in, if he needed him, he would have flown as a Mercury Gemini. He'd been a moonwalker, Deke Slayton, but instead he got to choose all of the crews. He did it his way with Alan Shepard, who was also his Mercury astronaut buddy that got grounded for an ear Meniere's imbalance, Meniere's disease, and he corrected that, and Deke put him on as a crew commander for Apollo 14, our return to flight, you can't forget, after Apollo 13. During the Apollo 1 fire, all right, Deke, shown here at the controls, was going to go in with the other 3 astronauts. He wanted to go in and sit in the well beneath the seats and work under the footrests where the fire later started. He was going to go in as the fourth astronaut to try to solve some of their communication problems. Other technicians had been in there before. So, and after Apollo, he was assigned to manage the approach and landing tests of the space program on there. But where did he get the nickname? What was his name anyway? Tommy Usiak. Do you know Deke Slayton's full name? It was Donald Kent Slayton. Don Slayton just doesn't sound the same as Deke Slayton. So where did he get the nickname Deke? Well, when he was in pilot school, particularly test pilot school, there was another pilot whose name was also Don. So in order to avoid confusion in radio communications, they called Slayton, referred to by his initials, DK, which were eventually shortened to Deke. And now you know how Deke Slayton got his nickname from Don. Yeah, Don Slayton just don't cut it. Like when you say Deke in the space community, you know exactly who you're talking about. Don, you could be talking about Don Lynn, you could be talking about Don Parker, Don, all kinds of other Dons in there. Well, let's see. A couple other interesting things about Deke. When I first went out to the Mercury Monument when I was on vacation, maybe 20 years ago, I looked down at Deke Slayton's handprints and what was said about Deke at the Mercury Monuments. Now, Selvin, you noticed right away. What is different about Deke Slayton's handprints in bronze there? My God. Yeah, go ahead, Selvin.
Half a finger.
Yeah, he's missing a ring finger on his left hand. And I'm looking at that, and I put my hands down on Deke's, and I'm going, holy cow, how could he be an astronaut and be missing a finger? Now, they had to know about it because in his military career in the Air Force, they obviously caught on to it. But you're going to see a lot of pictures now of Deke Slayton. He's got that left hand in his pocket. Yeah, boy, he don't show it off too much, all right, in public. And you'll see him a lot holding that hand in his left-hand pocket there. But so now you know Deke Slayton was missing a ring finger. And how did that happen as we're looking at his Apollo Soyuz Test Project there? Well, I told you he was a farm boy, and the family farm was a big deal. And when he was age 5, he was clearing a horse-drawn hay mower when his left finger got whacked off. All right, by it. And ouch! And I don't know if the mom or dad ever found the finger among the hay in there. Today, you could probably put it in a jar and they'd reattach it. But, yep, old Deke Slayton didn't have a left finger there, and I was just flipped out when I found that out. How could he be an astronaut, I wondered. So, well, a couple other things you might not know about Deke Slayton is he was a bomber pilot in World War II. All right, there's a picture of him as a Douglas A-26 bomber, all right, in World War II. And there he is with Charlie Duke on the landing of Apollo 11. Charlie Duke, of course, about to say, you know, Tranquility. Selvin, you've got on the bottom down there the oral histories there. I don't know if we can take that off. Is that a T or there's a control on the bottom there? It's one of the buttons. Now you don't do it with the mouse, Selvin. You do it with one of the. All right, that's okay. These oral histories are made with the. Oh yeah, maybe an M. To put my name back up there. Don't worry about it. But we are grateful for the Marie Louise West Endowment that handed us some money. There we are. Thank you, Selvin. A few years ago to upgrade our program the way we are. Deke Slayton, you always frequently see him with the turtleneck, t-shirt, usually colored copper. Everyone else is wearing white shirts, skinny ties, not him. Huffing some cigarettes there too during this day, but little did you maybe know that Deke. One part about him, he was the astronaut wrangler like you wouldn't believe. Here's the Apollo 11 astronauts at a TV set doing another interview. Look how enthusiastic they are about it there. But there off to the left there is Deke sitting there with his, I know that has to be copper colored. That was kind of his thing, wearing that copper colored. Then Alan Shepard started wearing the same kind of a turtleneck T-shirt for the day in the 60s. But you can bet that they'd be looking at Deke when some question will come up to whether they were to answer it or not. And he may have been going, "Hey boys, time out! Don't answer that." He probably did that a lot. Stop, quit, around there. But you see Deke in the corner of a lot of public appearances by astronauts because he was the man that wanted to make sure that they didn't put their foot in their mouth. He was there to bail them out. He was there to help them as a good guy should. So there's a TV monitor like I have in front of me, Selvin. Looks like they used a wastebasket to put that up there so the astronauts can see themselves in a studio set there. They got the lunar module on the table. Poor Mike Collins, they have his vehicle sitting at his feet there. Mike, we're done talking to you. We're at a commercial break. Get that model out of the way. We're ready to talk to Buzz and Neil there. So who knows what's going on? Of course, I make up a lot of stuff, but what I don't make up are some of the facts I share here on Stay Curious. I'm not going to make this up, that there is a museum dedicated to Deke Slayton in his hometown. I think that's pretty cool. They're at Sparta, Wisconsin. A lot of the native towns of our wonderful astronauts have things like this going on. Again, he died of a malignant brain tumor in 1993 at age 69. That's far too young. Of course, we lost Neil Young at age 82. Neil Armstrong, at age 82. And what's this, Mark? What do you throw in this rocket there for? Because Deke Slayton was the CEO of a company that launched this rocket. All right, this was the. Let me get my facts straight here. Where's the Conestoga 1? This was a rock. He's director of a rocket called the Conestoga, which on September 9th, 1982, that's 40 years ago, 41 years ago almost, Selvin, was the first privately funded rocket to reach space. This rocket, and you see the people in the background, so it's only about 60 feet tall. It launched a 1-ton dummy payload that included 40 gallons of water. All right, that's 8 times 40 is 320 gallons of water. The payload was successfully ejected at about 180 miles high into an orbit, and the Conestoga 1 became the first privately funded rocket to reach space, and Deke Slayton was the director of this mission. How about that? To stay curious about there. And there, just for fun, I've never put up a astronaut's passport, but this was on as I was harvesting some pictures, and there's Deke Slayton, or I'll bet it says Donald Kent Slayton, of course, on his passport there. So God bless you, Deke Slayton. We've missed you for the last 30 years, but I'll tell you what, we will never, ever stop talking about him and the wonderful things that he did, putting those crews together. It had to be a lot of griping and complaining, and there's a drama with Buzz Aldrin thought he should be the first one to go out and walk on the moon, and but Deke was honored a few years ago when Expedition 45 welcomed the Cygnus cargo ship called the SS Deke Slayton. That's what the astronauts of Expedition 45 saw. That was about 4 years ago, as we're up to Expedition 69 now. So I think that's cool. So I hope that you've enjoyed a little bit of knowledge about Deke Slayton, about the juxtaposing 6 years, the Apollo and moon landing. When we beat the Russians 6 years later, we're hugging them in outer space, okay, in there. So, all right, as we're going out here, Selvin, who's watching today? You're going to hand me the list there. We appreciate everybody today. Doug Forrest, I bet you have seen Doug O, the ASTP command module. Robert Laws up in Dundee, Scotland. Tommy Usiak, good to see you. William Whiting was in the building today. William, we appreciate your, let me reach down there again and show you all my bald spot. William Whiting, we appreciate Bill's enthusiasm to help our museum, as does Carlton Bailey. Hey, CB, I'll give you a call here in a little bit. Dave Stang, he's up in Michigan watching us. Gary Gerald just got done. He's probably doing some harvesting, maybe, of those Vidalia onions or peanuts going on up there. And Cliff Watson, my Australian buddy in Pomona. You getting ready for winter down there? You are in the throes of winter there, Cliff. Hope it's not been too cold for you down there in Australia. But we have this to go out with you today, is the moon's up in the sky, and we want you to be thinking about our Apollo astronauts landing on the moon on these 6 areas right there. They're Apollo 11s, easy to find. 11, 14, and 12 are right along the equator. 16 is right in the middle of the big mountain area there. The bright crater at the bottom is Tycho that has rays going from it. We'll start seeing that in a couple of days as the moon's about first quarter now. It's been cloudy the last few nights here. But Apollo 17 and 15 up there at the top went to some strategic areas. The oval on the left is your key, that Mare Chrism, Sea of Crisis, in the upper right-hand corner there. And then just look to the left at about 4 o'clock, and there at the shores of Tranquility Sea is Apollo 11 landing site. And here is Neil Armstrong a few months before he passed away at age 82, and I believe that was almost 10 years ago. And after Armstrong's death, his family said this, as we're thinking about the great man and wrapping up another year of celebrating Apollo 11. Here is from the family. For those who may ask what they can do to honor Neil, we have a simple request. Honor his example of service, accomplishment, and modesty. And the next time you go out on a clear night and see the moon smiling down at you, think of Neil Armstrong and give him a wink. Well, I'll certainly do that tonight for you, Neil. Another native Ohioan, but more importantly, a human being who had a lot on his shoulders, and he handled it quite well, the fame of being the first man on the moon. And we're sure that he wholeheartedly was involved with the Apollo Soyuz Test Project and having 2 warring countries or rival countries make peace with each other. And we still make peace today with the International Space Station, 3 Russians, 3 Americans, and United Arab Prince are up there right now in our International Space Station. And 3 Chinese are doing things on their Tiangong. 10 humans orbiting the Earth at the moment. We will add to that in August, about August 18th, when the Crew 7 launches off with Jasmine Mowgli as the commander, rookie Marine commander she will be. So, Selvin, thank you for everything today. Are we clear? Well, good job, Selvin. You did outstanding. Marty, I'm glad to give you a day off on there. And we've lined up maybe Dean Schaff, who is a ground operations maintenance man on the transoceanic abort landing sites of the shuttle. I hope to have Dean come in here Tuesday if it works out. Also, we have a recorded conversation with astronaut Mike Baker that we're going to air, maybe not this week, but the following week. And we're going to also record a conversation with Winston Scott in the near future here. They always can't be timely to be live, but we're efforting some astronauts and other VIPs because we know you enjoy those interviews, and I certainly enjoy listening to what these astronauts and space workers have to help us stay curious. So until next time, we want to thank you all for taking your time to watch Stay Curious. Please tell your friends that we feel we're the only place where they can get stories about our shuttle era, about our astronauts throughout all epochs of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo eras, and more importantly, share with you things to help you stay curious. Until next time, I'm Mark Marquette saying, I can't wait to see you again to bridge the space between us.